On a dream cruise, humble Alyssa falls in love with a mysterious man who disappears without a trace. Months later, she discovers she's pregnant with triplets and tries to find him. The biggest surprise? The man is actually the billionaire owner of the luxury ship fleet. Now, both must overcome distrust to find true love. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Alyssa could hardly believe her luck as she walked along the crowded pier, small suitcase in hand, eyes fixed on the massive cruise ship looming ahead. Hundreds of people were milling about, some lugging matching luggage sets, others snapping last-minute photos with excited smiles. She'd been so overwhelmed by the idea of this trip, one she'd never dreamed she could afford, that her hands felt clammy around the handle of her suitcase. Yet here she was, a free ticket in her possession, ready to board a luxury liner that promised nights of dancing under the stars, fine dining, and the sort of pampering she usually only saw on TV. She paused for a moment to take it all in. The ship towered above her, its white hull reflecting the sun. As she lined up behind other vacationers, she caught the hum of chatter blending with the distant squawking of seagulls. Her heart fluttered with a mix of anxiety and sheer exhilaration. She reminded herself that she deserved a little happiness. Life had been tough lately. Tight finances, endless job hunts, overdue rent. Winning that ticket felt like a gift from the universe, a sign that maybe her fortunes were about to change. Stepping on board, she was greeted by enthusiastic crew members offering brightly colored drinks with tiny umbrellas. Her face lit up with cautious joy as she accepted one, the sweet scent of tropical fruit wafting up. She thanked the young attendant who gave her a gracious bow, then proceeded to direct her to the reception area. From there, she headed to her cabin at the end of a long corridor. Upon entering, she noted its simplicity: a single bed, a porthole displaying the endless glitter of ocean waves, and barely enough room to wheel in her suitcase. Still, it felt fresh and tidy. She couldn't help comparing its size to the spacious suites she'd passed on her way, but she quickly brushed aside any twinge of envy. This was already more than she ever imagined. After unpacking, she made her way to one of the open decks, where she leaned on the railing and watched the late afternoon sky melting into a palette of oranges and pinks. A cool breeze played with her hair, and for the first time in what felt like ages, she let herself breathe deeply. Maybe tonight, she thought, she'd explore the ship. Maybe she'd visit one of those fancy cocktail bars she'd read about in the brochure. Who knew? This might be a chance to step out of her comfort zone and leave her worries behind. Nightfall arrived with a burst of energy. The cruise's first official party had a Caribbean theme, complete with steel drums, upbeat DJs, and flamboyant decorations. Alyssa, wearing a simple sundress she'd managed to borrow from a friend, entered the lively scene feeling a bit uncertain. She had no dance partner, no group of friends to keep her company, and her self-consciousness crept up the moment she saw elegant guests twirling on the dance floor. Yet the music beckoned. She let the rhythmic pulse guide her until she found herself swaying gently, eyes closed, letting the moment wash over her. Amid the swirl of music and vibrant lights, a gentle voice spoke behind her. "May I join you?" She turned to see a strikingly handsome man, his eyes bright with curiosity and a faint smile playing on his lips. He introduced himself as Ethan, offering a polite hand to lead her into the heart of the dance floor. Alyssa felt a mix of gratitude and shy excitement, unable to ignore the instant spark of attraction. His steps were confident but unforced. He didn't show off or try to overwhelm her. Instead, he matched her pace, guiding her gently, making sure she was comfortable. When she glanced up, she caught him studying her face as if trying to memorize her features. Their conversation flowed as easily as the dance steps. Ethan asked how she ended up on the cruise, and Alyssa confessed with a bashful grin that she'd won the ticket. He seemed genuinely fascinated by her story, telling her she was lucky in a soft tone that almost sounded envious. She noticed, however, that whenever she tried to ask about his background, he replied in vague terms. "I travel a lot for work," or "I needed a break from responsibilities." Still, he seemed kind, and she found herself wanting to know more about him. After the set ended, they decided the music was a bit too loud for deeper conversation and slipped away to a quieter deck. The moon hung like a giant pearl over the water, reflecting in the ripples. Alyssa rested her arms on the railing while Ethan stood beside her, his shoulder almost touching hers. They joked about the whirlwind of dancing, swapped favorite music genres, and laughed over funny cruise moments they'd witnessed that evening, like a guest who enthusiastically tried to limbo but got stuck halfway. At one point, as she brushed a wayward strand of hair from her face, Ethan lifted his hand, gently tucking it behind her ear. The gesture felt strangely intimate, sending a flutter through her stomach. She found herself smiling so widely her cheeks ached. He looked at her as if she was the only person on that crowded ship, making her feel safe and special, even though they were still practically strangers. They walked along the deck for a while, their footsteps echoing softly. Each new topic of conversation brought a sense of connection, whether it was books they both liked or the distant places on their travel wish lists. She teased him for being so tight-lipped about his life, and he chuckled, acknowledging that he preferred to keep things simple and discreet. It struck her as slightly cryptic, but she was too charmed by his warm presence to press further. Eventually, they found themselves near the lifeboats, away from prying eyes. The soft hum of the ocean and the occasional squawk of a seagull under the moonlight lent an almost dreamlike quality to the moment. She felt him draw closer, the space between them shrinking until their lips gently met in a tender kiss. It was brief, but left her breathless. They pulled apart and looked at each other with a mutual sense of wonder, as if they both realized this was something far more meaningful than a random shipboard flirtation. Their steps carried them back to the main deck, where the party was still in full swing. He promised they'd meet again the following day, maybe share breakfast or explore a part of the ship neither had visited yet. Feeling like her heart might burst from happiness, Alyssa said goodnight. Once back in her cabin, she sank onto the bed, mind buzzing with each minute detail. Ethan's whispered jokes, his comforting smile, the glow of moonlight on his face. Her cheeks warmed at the memory of their dance and that moment when their hands intertwined. Exhausted from dancing and overjoyed by the evening's unexpected turn, she fell asleep dreaming of ways they could spend the rest of the trip together. When morning arrived, she woke earlier than usual, excited to find him again. But as she wandered through the bustling breakfast hall, scanning each table, there was no sign of his familiar figure. She checked the pool deck. Nothing. Outside the lounge where they had danced, she asked the bartender if he'd seen someone answering to Ethan's description. He offered a polite shrug and responded that he couldn't recall a guest by that name. Perplexed, she approached a couple of crew members who politely shook their heads. Even a more thorough search, including a walk through multiple corridors and a gentle inquiry at the reception desk, turned up no clues. It was as if Ethan had vanished into thin air. Confused and fighting a creeping sense of disappointment, she tried to reason with herself. Perhaps he'd gone on an early excursion at one of the ports or fallen ill. Still, the gnawing worry in her stomach refused to subside. By midday, she'd exhausted nearly all her options. She'd asked around discreetly, repeatedly glanced into every common area, and tiptoed around restricted sections of the ship just in case he was there. All her polite requests for passenger information were met with polite but firm refusals. That evening she stood once again on the deck, watching the horizon shift through gold and rose hues. A slight chill had set in, and she wrapped her arms around her shoulders, wrestling with the sinking fear that this incredible, captivating man might have vanished as swiftly as he had appeared. Alyssa stands alone on the deck, a rising sense of unease swirling in her chest. She clutches the memory of their magical encounter, wondering if Ethan was just a dream, or if something more mysterious is at play. Alyssa woke at dawn with thoughts of the previous night swirling through her mind. She couldn't stop replaying every detail of her encounter with Ethan, the spark in his eyes, the gentleness in his voice, the way he'd guided her with quiet confidence on the dance floor. The sunrise tinted her cabin porthole in shades of soft pink, inspiring her to head outside, where the crisp morning air and open sea might settle her restless heart. Standing on the deck, she steadied herself against the railing, convinced that she had to find Ethan before the cruise ended. It was only the second full day at sea, and yet she felt the clock already ticking. She hurried to the breakfast buffet, hoping the hostess might know something. The clink of silverware and low hum of conversation provided a cozy backdrop. Clutching a small plate of fresh fruit, she approached the hostess stand, clearing her throat politely. The hostess, a cheerful woman with a bright smile, greeted her as though she were any other passenger. "I'm looking for someone," Alyssa began tentatively, describing Ethan's features and recounting the little information she had. The woman scrunched up her face apologetically. She explained she saw countless guests every day and couldn't be sure who was who, especially since people were always milling in and out. Alyssa tried pressing a bit. Maybe he'd left a name for a reservation. But the hostess merely shook her head. It was too vague. Disappointed, Alyssa thanked her and moved on. She decided next to check the bar where they'd first danced. The memory of the vibrant party still felt alive in her mind. Swirling lights, laughter, the taste of rum punch on her lips. Now, in the morning light, the bar looked so different. Quiet, neatly organized, chairs stacked on tables, the scent of fresh cleaner in the air. A lone bartender arranged bottles in an orderly row, preparing for the afternoon rush. Alyssa stepped closer. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I was here last night. You might have served me." She felt shy, admitting she hadn't exactly paid attention to who handed her drinks. "I was dancing with someone. Tall, dark hair, charming smile. Did you see us? Do you remember him at all?" The bartender paused, then gave a faint, thoughtful nod. "A lot of handsome men come through here," he replied, his tone apologetic. "But maybe I noticed one chatting with a young woman by the dance floor." He couldn't offer much more than that. He remembered only a vague impression of a man who paid with cash, left a generous tip, and disappeared before closing. Though it was a small confirmation that she wasn't imagining everything, it didn't bring her any closer to finding Ethan. She thanked the bartender and drifted out into the winding corridors of the ship. Determination fueled her steps, even as confusion grew. Everyone she spoke to either gave a polite shrug or claimed no knowledge. Was Ethan avoiding her on purpose, or was she just asking the wrong people? She ventured near the pool deck. Lounge chairs fanned out across the gleaming floor, and the chatter of relaxed vacationers filled the air. Swimmers splashed in the bright blue water. Alyssa took her time, scanning each face she passed, lips parted, prepared to call out his name if she spotted him. Her heart pounded each time she glimpsed dark hair from behind, only to realize it was a teenager with a baseball cap or an older gentleman reading by the pool. After nearly an hour of fruitless wandering, she sank onto a shady chair, debating her next move. A slight tap on her shoulder startled her. She looked up to see a friendly cabin stewardess she'd met earlier that morning. The stewardess had come by Alyssa's room to drop off fresh towels and ended up chatting with her for a few minutes. The woman offered a sympathetic smile, sensing Alyssa's frustration. "You seem anxious," the stewardess said gently. "Is everything okay?" Alyssa hesitated but found herself opening up about her mysterious dance partner, how he'd vanished without a trace. The stewardess listened attentively, nodding here and there, and promised to keep an eye out in case she spotted any clue around the staff corridors. Alyssa felt a burst of relief having an ally, however minor, in her search. At least someone took her concerns seriously. Encouraged, Alyssa stood again, deciding to explore parts of the ship she hadn't been to yet. Near the back, a series of locked doors and narrow halls indicated restricted crew sections. She walked past the sign that read, "Crew only, no passengers beyond this point," and felt tempted to peek inside. Before she had time to readjust her curiosity, a large security guard appeared, eyes narrowed, politely telling her to step away. His tone was stern, but not cruel. He explained that certain areas were off-limits for safety and privacy reasons. "I was just looking for someone," Alyssa tried to clarify, but the guard cut her off with a sharp shake of his head. "Not here," he stated with finality. Feeling the heat of embarrassment burn her cheeks, she nodded, apologized, and backed away. Once she turned the corner, however, she almost collided with a second guard who emerged unexpectedly. The man stared at her suspiciously, as if deciding whether to escort her back to the passenger decks. "Sorry," she whispered, struggling to steady her breath. He gave a terse grunt and moved aside, allowing her to pass. She hurried away with her mind churning. Why so much caution? Were they only doing their jobs, or was there something more behind their guarded behavior? A subtle pulse of fear merged with her frustration. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Ethan was tangled up in something too big to easily explain. Later that afternoon, drained from her fruitless search, she found herself drawn to the bar one more time. Maybe a staff member would turn something in to Lost and Found. People misplace belongings all the time, and perhaps Ethan had left behind a clue. She approached the bartender from earlier, who was now busy pouring drinks for sunburnt vacationers eager for cocktails. He glanced at her in recognition, nodding politely. She waited patiently until he had a free moment. "Did anyone leave anything behind?" she asked softly, feeling a little silly. "I'm still hoping to find that person." For a brief second he seemed hesitant, as if weighing his words. Then he leaned closer, eyes darting around. "A wristband," he said under his breath. "Fancy gold design. It was found near the bar, probably last night. I can't be sure whose it is, but—" He stepped back and rummaged in a small drawer beneath the counter, retrieving a sleek gold band. He held it out to her discreetly. Alyssa carefully turned it over in her hands. It was heavier than she'd expected, engraved on the underside with the initials ED. Her heart skittered. The letters pulsed with potential meaning. "Ethan Davis?" she whispered, a rush of excitement lighting her eyes. The bartender offered a shrug that neither confirmed nor denied, but she could see he was trying to be helpful without overstepping his boundaries. "Thanks," she breathed, clutching the wristband protectively. She gave him a grateful nod, slipping away before attracting too much attention. Every thought in her head started swirling at once. If this indeed belonged to Ethan, then it meant he was real. She hadn't invented his name, or their connection, or last night's kiss under the moon. Relief mingled with worry, though, as she recalled the security guard's strange behavior and the staff's general avoidance of her questions. When the loudspeaker announced the ship would be docking soon at a tropical port for the day's excursions, Alyssa felt time pressing down on her shoulders. She joined the throng of passengers heading toward the exit ramps, only half listening to the excited chatter about local beaches and markets. In her pocket was the proof that Ethan had been there, at least long enough to drop something so valuable. Why would he vanish, and why did the staff seem so secretive? She lingered by the railings, watching other passengers disembark one by one, some wearing bright floral shirts, others donning wide-brimmed hats. A lively steel drum band played to welcome them ashore. Typically, she would be thrilled at the prospect of seeing a new place. But today, anxiety gnawed at her. If Ethan was still on the ship, time was running out to find him. If he'd left already, how would she ever track him down? Shaken from her thoughts by the bustle of the crowd, she made a snap decision. She wasn't ready to leave the ship yet. Wandering around port might be relaxing, but it wouldn't answer her mounting questions. Instead, she'd use the quieter hours while most people were off exploring to do some more digging. But even that plan felt risky. A single glance at the determined security presence stationed on every deck reminded her to be cautious. She couldn't afford to be thrown off for snooping. What little clue she had might slip through her fingers for good. Cradling the wristband, she promised herself she would find answers. She took a deep breath, tried to calm her racing heart and let the wave of disembarking passengers jostle her forward. As passengers begin to disembark, Alyssa clutches the wristband with ED engraved on it, heart pounding at the thought that Ethan might be somewhere just out of reach. Alyssa's shoes clacked against the ship's gangway as she finally disembarked, her eyes darting through the crowd in one last desperate attempt to spot Ethan. The intense Caribbean sun beat down, but her thoughts churned louder than the bustling pier. She'd clung to the hope that he might appear at the last moment, maybe stepping onto the deck or calling her name over the loudspeaker. Yet the well-dressed man who'd swept her off her feet had vanished as cleanly as he'd arrived. A prickle of disappointment ran along her spine. Everything about their encounter, the dancing, the late-night conversation, that enchanted kiss, had felt too real to be a dream. But if it wasn't a dream, why couldn't she find any trace of him? A taxi waited outside the cruise terminal, engine idling. Alyssa climbed into the back seat, cradling her small suitcase as the driver asked for her destination. She blinked at the question, momentarily forgetting she had to return to her humble reality. The driver repeated himself, and she gave the name of her modest apartment complex. With a lurch, the cab pulled away, weaving into the city's midday traffic. As they wound through busy streets, Alyssa caught glimpses of cheerful vacationers heading to hotels, arms laden with bags of souvenirs. She was struck by the feeling that her own journey had ended too soon, unfinished somehow. Pressing her forehead to the glass, she thought of the golden wristband with the initials ED now resting in her purse. The memory of that discovery still gave her hope, though it did nothing to soothe the gnawing sense of confusion. Had Ethan left the ship on purpose, leaving her with nothing but questions? Once she arrived home, the cramped walls of her apartment reminded her just how different her life was from the glitter and spectacle of the cruise. After paying the driver, she dragged herself up the stairs and stepped into the space where a half-finished to-do list on the fridge and unopened mail on the counter served as reminders of normal life. She set her suitcase down, inhaling the familiar scent of her own cooking and faint cleaning supplies. It felt oddly comforting, if a bit lonely. That first night back, she tried to distract herself by putting away laundry and playing music, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Ethan, his warm smile, the way he'd listened intently to her stories, and the magnetic pull she'd felt in his presence. She tried calling the cruise company on a whim, hoping to track him through a passenger list. After navigating countless automated messages, she finally reached a polite but indifferent agent who insisted they couldn't share personal information. Disheartened, Alyssa went to bed clutching the gold wristband. She told herself that perhaps the next day she'd wake up feeling calmer, more able to let go. But morning brought an unexpected turn. Alyssa woke nauseous, the bitter taste of bile forcing her into the tiny bathroom. She knelt on the cool tiles, shuddering as she tried to calm her breathing. She chalked it up to lingering stress from the trip, or maybe something she ate the previous night. Yet the sickness continued the following day, then the next, leaving her weak and baffled. After almost a week of constant fatigue and a swirl of dizziness every time she stood too quickly, she decided it was time to see a doctor. She made an appointment at the local clinic, a small building with scuffed floors and posters reminding patients to wash their hands. The waiting room was crowded with coughing children and tired parents, but eventually, Alyssa found herself sitting on the exam table, the protective paper crinkling beneath her. A friendly physician asked about her symptoms, did a quick series of tests, then asked if there was any chance she might be pregnant. The question stunned her more than she expected. She stammered that it was possible, but not really planned. The doctor nodded compassionately and left the room to run a test, returning after what felt like an eternity. "Alyssa," she began softly, "you are pregnant." The words reverberated in the small room. The doctor added something else, likely reassurance, but Alyssa's mind was already whirling. She was pregnant? Images of Ethan's face flickered in her thoughts. Suddenly she was bombarded with confusion, fear, and an odd, warm flicker of hope. As she gathered her bag and stepped outside, her knees felt shaky. Her world had just flipped, and she had no idea what her next step should be. Within a few days, after more detailed tests, the news became even more astonishing. She was carrying not one baby, but 3. Triplets. The revelation made her hands tremble as she clutched the ultrasound images, staring at the 3 tiny figures. The doctor gave her a solemn pep talk about the challenges of high-risk pregnancies, stressing the importance of proper rest, nutrition, and routine checkups. Alyssa felt an immense pressure settle on her shoulders. How could she, living paycheck to paycheck, possibly handle 3 babies on her own? That evening, she sat on the edge of her bed, phone in hand, unable to stop scrolling through her call history, half expecting a miracle text from Ethan. Of course, there was nothing. She realized she barely knew anything about him, just his first name, a hint that he traveled a lot, and the initials on the wristband. Could ED be someone else entirely? That small possibility gnawed at her, but her gut insisted that it stood for Ethan Davis. It had to. She tried emailing the cruise company again, more persistently this time, attaching scans of her ticket and referencing the date of the party, hoping to jog someone's memory. The automated responses confirmed her worst fears. She'd likely never get through to a real person who cared enough to help. Days passed without any reply. Alyssa was left pacing the apartment, occasionally interrupted by bouts of morning sickness and a swirl of hormones that left her either weeping or strangely euphoric. The realization that she was going to be a mother of 3 pulled her between excitement and panic. Her friend, a kind neighbor with an outspoken nature, popped by one afternoon. She found Alyssa slumped on the couch, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. Between ragged breaths, Alyssa confessed the pregnancy, the chance ticket, the elusive man on the cruise, and her fear that she couldn't handle all this alone. The neighbor listened attentively, then drew Alyssa into a warm hug. "Hey, we'll figure this out," she said gently, brushing away Alyssa's tears. "You're strong, and if there's a father in the picture, we'll find him." She offered to call in favors from acquaintances or even contact a friend who was a lawyer, just in case. The gesture lifted a bit of the weight pressing on Alyssa's chest, but she knew this problem required more than just friendly advice. She started researching on her own, typing E. Davis shipping mogul and cruise lines E. Davis into search bars late at night, eyes burning from the glow of the laptop screen. After countless dead ends and irrelevant news stories, she finally came upon a snippet. Ethan Davis acquires luxury liner for expanding fleet. The article was short, mentioning a wealthy young magnate who controlled a lucrative cruise empire. No photo accompanied the piece, but the letters leaped off the screen, making her pulse hammer. Could it be the same Ethan who disappeared on her? The more she dug, the more vague mentions she found of E. Davis, a private billionaire rumored to avoid publicity. Some articles described him as a reclusive figure who valued his anonymity, someone who rarely appeared in the press and kept personal details under tight wraps. As she read, Alyssa felt a sense of certainty bloom in her chest. This had to be him, the Ethan she danced with, the man who'd left her with a gold wristband and a memory she couldn't shake. Yet how was she supposed to contact someone so influential, so hidden behind corporate walls and armies of assistants? She'd already tried the obvious route, contacting the cruise line directly, and been shut out. Her friend's words echoed in her mind. If there's a father in the picture, we'll find him. For the first time in days, Alyssa felt her resolve harden. She didn't have the luxury of giving up. There were 3 little lives now growing inside her, and they deserved to know where they came from. She deserved answers, and maybe, just maybe, some measure of support. Armed with the fresh knowledge from her online search, she began compiling everything she had: the wristband, her ticket stubs, the ultrasound images, even the few candid photos she'd snapped on the cruise, though Ethan wasn't in any of them. If no one at the cruise company would help, perhaps she could reach out to some kind of media or corporate contact. It was a long shot, but her babies were worth any struggle she faced. One evening, after an exhausting day of sending emails and getting nowhere, she collapsed onto her bed, phone in hand. That was when another article popped up. A local business journal just posted about a recent acquisition in the Davis shipping empire. Alyssa's heart thumped violently. She clicked the link, breathing quickly, scanning the page. Alyssa stares at a new headline about Ethan Davis, her heart pounding with the realization, he's definitely the same man. Now she just needs to make him listen. Alyssa walked into the lobby of the towering glass building feeling like an imposter. Everything inside gleamed with money, the marble floors, the rows of polished elevators, the well-dressed professionals striding briskly through the halls. Even the ambient scent, a subdued blend of air conditioning and expensive cologne, seemed designed to communicate power and prestige. Clutching the handle of her bag, she approached the main reception desk, where a perfectly coiffed woman offered her a polite smile. "Good morning," Alyssa began quietly, trying to suppress the nerves fluttering in her chest. "I'm here to see Ethan Davis." The receptionist's brow arched slightly, though her smile remained. "May I ask if you have an appointment?" Alyssa swallowed. "No, but I really need to speak with him about an urgent personal matter. Would it be possible to leave a message or—" "I'm sorry," the woman interrupted, glancing down at her computer screen. "Mr. Davis's schedule is booked, and he rarely takes unscheduled visits. May I direct you to his public relations department or perhaps the general inquiries email?" Alyssa felt the air rush from her lungs. "I've tried emailing," she said, her voice trembling with frustration. "I never hear back." With a sympathetic tilt of her head, the receptionist handed Alyssa a small business card containing the company's main phone number and a generic email address. "I wish I could do more," she added gently, "but Mr. Davis is extremely busy." Alyssa nodded, murmured a thanks, and stepped aside. She watched the receptionist's perfectly poised attention shift seamlessly to greet the next person in line, as if Alyssa had already vanished. Feeling a prick of desperation, she lingered near a column, considering her options. She'd traveled all the way to the city for this, braving the busy trains and bracing herself for possible rejection. It was difficult not to lose heart. After a few minutes, she decided to try a different approach. She slipped into a small cafe on the ground floor of the building, ordered a tea she barely tasted, and kept her gaze on the lobby. Maybe if she just waited, she might catch Ethan on his way in or out. However, as the hours dragged by and she finished her drink, there was no sign of him, nor any clue he'd even been on the premises. All she could see were formally dressed executives hustling by, none resembling the man she'd met on the cruise. Eventually, a security guard approached with a polite but firm request that she not loiter unless she planned to make a purchase. Defeated, she gathered her courage for one more attempt, speaking to a man who appeared to be an assistant or lower-level employee. When she asked whether Mr. Davis might have left for lunch, he gave her a puzzled look, then suggested she contact the usual channels before hustling off. It confirmed her worst fear. Ethan's company was a fortress, and no one wanted to open the gates. Back at her apartment that evening, Alyssa numbly checked her email. Multiple messages to the shipping conglomerate's various addresses sat unanswered. Her phone calls either led nowhere or ended with polite brush-offs. The only things greeting her these days were silent rings, endless automated menus, and the monotone voice of receptionists. She sank onto her couch, frustration mingling with her escalating pregnancy symptoms. Her belly wasn't yet prominent, but the constant morning sickness and fatigue were unmissable. She rubbed her temples, trying to ward off the throbbing headache that came from hours of fruitless searching. Then, as she scrolled through local business news on her phone, a headline made her heart lurch. Charity Gala to spotlight Davis Shipping's new projects. There, in the fine print, was mention of Ethan Davis's rumored attendance. The next morning found Alyssa rummaging through a second-hand store in the hopes of finding a gown that wouldn't break her already strained bank account. She settled on a simple black dress that flattered her figure, though it was a touch more formal than she was used to. She tugged self-consciously at the sleeves, telling herself that if this event was her only chance to speak with Ethan, she couldn't afford to look like an outsider. She had no invitation, no fancy credentials, but she had determination. That evening, the gala venue buzzed with well-dressed guests stepping out of sleek cars. Giant floodlights illuminated the building's ornate entrance, where a gleaming banner read, "Charity Night, hosted by Davis Shipping." Alyssa stood on the sidewalk, heart pounding, trying to steady her breath. From here, she could see a red carpet rolled out along the steps. Photographers shouted instructions to celebrities and socialites, their cameras flashing like fireworks. She found a discreet side entrance where less notable attendees and staff slipped in. Gathering her courage, she blended into the group, murmuring a polite greeting to a distracted employee. Inside, the grand lobby shimmered with marble accents, and a champagne fountain took center stage. Gentle instrumental music played from a small stage, lending an air of refined celebration to the crowd. Alyssa's eyes darted around, searching for Ethan's familiar silhouette. Fear and anticipation tangled in her stomach. With each step across the gleaming floor, she felt the eyes of elegantly dressed strangers skimming over her. She tried not to shrink under their scrutiny. This was for her children, she reminded herself. She had to push forward. She drifted deeper into the hall, weaving between high-top tables and clusters of chatting guests. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over everyone's coiffed hair and expensive suits. Occasionally, a server glided by offering champagne or hors d'oeuvres. Alyssa declined politely, her stomach too nervous for more than a sip of water. She noticed the hush that spread whenever someone important entered the room. At last, near a dais ringed by well-dressed individuals, she caught sight of Ethan. He wore a sharp black suit, standing tall as he shook hands with a group of older executives. Instantly, the memory of his smile on the cruise flooded her thoughts. Seeing him in this polished environment felt surreal, like she'd glimpsed a totally different side of him. Yet something in his face still resonated with the person she'd spent that magical night dancing with. Steeling herself, Alyssa wove through the throng, carefully avoiding eye contact with any vigilant staff who might question her presence. Her heart hammered so loudly she thought others might hear it. She inched closer, close enough to catch fragments of conversation, mentions of business expansions, philanthropic ventures, multi-million-dollar deals. This was the big leagues. And yet, she reminded herself, he was still Ethan, the father of her unborn children. She had a right to speak with him. She timed her approach for a moment when he had just finished greeting one executive and looked free for a second or two. Slipping in behind him, she gently touched his arm. He turned with casual politeness, expecting to see another socialite or dignitary. His eyes met hers, and recognition flared across his face. His composure faltered, and for a fleeting moment, he seemed genuinely surprised, maybe even glad to see her. "Alyssa," he breathed, hardly above a whisper. He looked around as though worried someone might overhear. She opened her mouth to speak, to tell him everything she'd kept bottled up, but before she could utter a word, a tuxedo-clad security guard appeared at her side. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to step away," he said, voice stern but polite. The conversation around them began to hush as other guests sensed the confrontation. Another guard joined, moving in on Alyssa's other side. Panic surged within her, but she pressed forward, desperate to get even a few words out. "Ethan," she said quickly, her voice shaking, "we need to talk. Please, I've tried everything to reach you. It's about the crew." She never got to finish. The guards moved in, one taking hold of her arm, guiding her firmly toward the exit. She could hear scattered whispers and see the disapproving frowns of onlookers who assumed she was an uninvited intruder seeking trouble. Her pulse roared in her ears. She twisted her head back, hoping Ethan might intervene. But a wall of well-dressed individuals parted in front of him, pushing him out of reach. Behind her, One of the guards muttered instructions into a radio, while another began escorting her swiftly across the marble floor. Her feet stumbled on the hem of her gown. She caught one last glimpse of Ethan stepping forward, a conflicted expression on his face. Was that concern she saw in his eyes? Or something else? She gasped out his name again, but the crowd had thickened, and soon she was swallowed up by moving bodies and the unstoppable force of security. A sense of helplessness overwhelmed her. She called out to him, trying to be heard above the chatter, but the guards had her pinned in a hustle to the doors. "Only 1 second more," she begged silently. "Just let me tell him about the babies." No such chance came. Cool night air hit her like a slap as they forced her outside. Cameras continued to flash near the red carpet area, but no one was paying attention to the woman being marched off to the side entrance. Alyssa's mind whirled. In the midst of everything, just for that brief instant, she'd caught Ethan's gaze. There was shock, maybe recognition, or even a flicker of regret. But whatever it was, it vanished behind the ranks of executives and security personnel. As the guards drag Alyssa out, she locks eyes with Ethan for a moment that crackles with shock, and then he disappears behind the throng of VIP guests. Alyssa stumbled out into the cool night air, still feeling the rush of being hustled away by security. Her cheeks burned from the humiliation of being thrown out in front of wealthy onlookers, though the sting in her chest hurt far worse. The red carpet scene was winding down, and a few lingering photographers were busy packing up their equipment. She paused a safe distance from the entrance, ignoring the questioning gazes of those who lingered near the doors. In the distance, expensive cars glided away with distinguished guests, none of them paying attention to her. Her breath came in ragged gasps, heart pounding from both the adrenaline of the altercation and the disappointment gnawing at her insides. Ethan had recognized her, of that she was sure. But in a flash, she'd been pulled back, surrounded by guards, and lost him in the crowd. She wondered if he'd even had a chance to process who she was before she vanished from his sight. After a few minutes, she noticed a young man emerging from behind one of the marble pillars near the gala's side exit. He looked as though he'd followed her outside, a lanyard with a corporate ID badge dangling from his neck. His expression was conflicted, a mixture of concern and wariness. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked gently, casting a quick glance over his shoulder to make sure no one else was watching. Alyssa tried to steady her breathing. I'm okay," she managed, though her voice wavered. "Who are you?" "I work for Mr. Davis's company," he said, glancing at the ID badge as if to confirm it. "I'm just an assistant. I saw security escort you out." A surge of hope swelled in her chest. "Then please, could you help me? I've been trying to reach Ethan, Mr. Davis, for weeks. He vanished after our—" She hesitated, realizing how crazy it might sound. "We met on a cruise. It's personal. Very personal." The young man cast a furtive look back at the gala doors, where a couple of security guards still lingered, scanning the perimeter. "He's a private person," he said in a low voice. "A lot of people try to reach him for their own agendas." "I understand." Alyssa clasped her hands together, trying to appear sincere rather than desperate. "But I'm not here for money or to blackmail him. I need him to know something important." His brow furrowed. "I've heard rumors," he said, dropping his gaze. "People claim all sorts of things about him for a quick payoff. You should know the company deals with cases of alleged paternity, scams." Her pulse quickened. "I'm not a scammer," she insisted. "Here, look." She retrieved the small leather pouch in her purse, pulling out the golden wristband emblazoned with ED in careful script. "He gave this to me," she whispered, though the memory of exactly how it had come into her possession was fuzzy. Either it had slipped off that night, or he'd left it behind at the bar. "I didn't even realize who he was at first, but I do now, and it's too important for me to give up." The assistant's skeptical eyes fell on the wristband. Alyssa noticed his expression shift, the slightest hint of empathy in his features. "I can't promise anything," he replied quietly. Usually these matters go through legal channels, but you're welcome to submit your story. That's all I've been doing, she interrupted in a trembling voice. Emails, phone calls. I came here personally and was thrown out. Please, She hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal to a stranger. But what choice did she have? I'm pregnant, she said softly. With triplets. It happened during the cruise. He deserves to know. The young man's face froze at the weight of her confession. I can't. He shifted uncomfortably. He's a very busy man and this sort of thing. You have no idea the caution we have to take. But listen. He lowered his voice further. I'll pass a message on to someone. Don't get your hopes up, but I promise I won't ignore it. He fished a business card out of his pocket, scribbled something on the back, and handed it to Alyssa. Call this number if you don't hear back soon. Before she could thank him, he glanced again at the guards, who were now eyeing them suspiciously, and darted back inside. Alyssa crumpled the card in her trembling hand. She wasn't sure if she felt relief, gratitude, or just more of the same anxious tension. She doubted the legal department approach, but at least it was more than a curt dismissal. She exhaled, then scanned the driveway for any sign of Ethan. Drivers in black suits leaned against gleaming cars, ready to whisk important guests away. The crowd was thinner now, but her gaze snagged on a door that suddenly opened on the side of the building. Ethan stepped out, flanked by 2 bodyguards. Her heart kicked into overdrive. She watched him glance around, clearly searching for something, or someone. Without stopping to question, Alyssa moved closer, weaving between parked vehicles. "Ethan!" she called, keeping her voice just loud enough to get his attention but not enough to draw immediate security aggression. He turned sharply, recognition flashing in his eyes. For a moment, he looked stricken, like he wasn't sure if he should approach or run. Alyssa clenched the wristband in her hand and lifted it slightly, hoping he'd see. "It's me," she said softly, stepping forward. "The woman you met on the cruise." He swallowed, tension rolling off him. "I remember." His tone carried both acknowledgement and caution. The bodyguard stepped in closer, but Ethan raised a hand, silently telling them to wait. "I tried everything to reach you," she continued, heart thudding in her chest. "I wrote emails, I called, and no one would help me." Confusion flickered across his face. I didn't know," he said, voice subdued. "My team, they filter everything." She shifted the golden wristband, letting the moonlight catch its polished surface. "Does this look familiar?" she asked, her voice catching. He stared at it. "Where did you get that?" "It was left behind at the bar on the ship the night we danced," she said, her emotions teetering between relief and dread. "You disappeared after that. I didn't even know who you really were until I got home and started piecing things together." His posture grew rigid, as though old memories clashed with his carefully managed present. "That cruise was supposed to be an escape," he murmured. "I thought—" He shook his head, eyes darting to his bodyguards. Their guarded expressions made him hesitate. She could sense his discomfort, how complicated his life must be. Feeling the tightness in her throat, she drew a breath and forced out the words that needed to be said. "Ethan, I'm pregnant. The babies, triplets, they're yours." She wasn't sure how to deliver that news gently, but the truth weighed on her heart. Her eyes threatened tears as she watched his expression shift from confusion to something like shock. His gaze snapped to her abdomen, then back to her face. For a moment, he simply stood there, as if all the air had been sucked from his lungs. One of the bodyguards leaned in, clearly wanting to usher Ethan away, but he didn't immediately budge. He searched for words, though none came out fluidly. Look, I'll have someone reach out. We can talk. This isn't the place." His attempt at composure slipped, revealing a genuine flash of worry in his eyes. "Please," Alyssa whispered, feeling tears roll down her cheeks. "I'm not after your money. I only want you to know." His jaw tightened and he gave a quick nod. "I'll send someone," he repeated more firmly this time. Then he turned, stepping toward a sleek black car idling by the curb. The bodyguards fell in around him, forming a protective barrier. Alyssa stood rooted to the spot, watching him slide into the back seat. The car pulled away smoothly, merging into the traffic beyond the glowing streetlights. In a matter of seconds, Ethan was gone again, leaving her trembling on the sidewalk. She wrapped her arms around her middle, her breath still hitching from the adrenaline. A part of her dared to hope. He'd said he would contact her. That was more progress than she'd made in all her attempts so far, yet she couldn't ignore the gnawing fear that he might vanish for good. For a long time she remained there, staring at the empty space where the car had just been. Relief warred with uncertainty in her mind. Maybe tonight was the first step toward clarity, or maybe it was just another glimpse of a closed door. She wiped her cheeks, telling herself it wasn't over. He'd seen the proof. She'd told him the truth, however briefly. That had to count for something. Slowly she gathered her thoughts and started walking, her head buzzing with too many questions. She hailed a taxi and climbed in, sinking against the seat as the driver pulled away from the curb. Through the window she watched the Gala building fade, its bright lights no longer blinding her. She's left on the sidewalk, exhausted but strangely hopeful that she finally broke through his icy facade. A late-night phone call from a blocked number rings at Alyssa's apartment. She picks it up, heart pounding. Could it be Ethan, reaching out at last? Alyssa's phone vibrated against the kitchen counter, startling her. It was nearly midnight, and she was in the middle of sipping tea in hopes of calming her frazzled nerves before bed. The caller ID read, "Blocked number." Her heart gave a little jolt. Memories of the previous night's chaos and the slight promise in Ethan's eyes rushed back. She picked up, voice tight with anticipation. "Hello?" A measured pause. Then a composed male voice responded, "Ms. Alyssa? I'm calling from Mr. Davis's office." She nearly dropped the phone in relief, pressing it tighter to her ear. "Yes, this is Alyssa. I'm here." The man cleared his throat. "Mr. Davis has requested a meeting with you, to be conducted at our legal department. We can arrange a date within the next few days. Are you available?" Alyssa's pulse pounded. After weeks of frantic searching, after all the stonewalling, the blocked calls, the humiliating fiasco at the gala, Ethan was finally making a move. "Yes," she said in a rush. "Yes, I'm available, whenever you need me." His voice remained neutral, as though reciting a script. "I'll email you the details. Bring any documentation you have related to your claim." He paused, letting the sentence hang in the air. "We expect you on Monday morning." Before Alyssa could ask any further questions, the line went dead. She set her phone on the counter, shaky excitement and dread mingling in her chest. This was it. She'd get to face Ethan again. But she also knew, deep down, that this wouldn't be a friendly reunion. The weekend that followed crawled by in a swirl of anxious energy. She combed through her small apartment, collecting anything that might prove her timeline, her cruise tickets, emails to the cruise company, ultrasound printouts, and of course the gold wristband inscribed with ED. She found herself rehearsing how to speak calmly, how to present her story without letting the frustration and heartbreak boil over. Occasionally the reality of her pregnancy reasserted itself with waves of queasiness that sent her rushing for fresh air. Each time she reminded herself that she had to fight not just for her own peace of mind, but for the well-being of the 3 babies growing inside her. Monday morning she arrived at the Davis Corporation's legal offices. The building was just as imposing as the last time she'd visited its lobby. Gleaming panels of glass, security guards stationed at the doors, employees rushing with purposeful strides. Alyssa drew a breath and stepped inside, grateful that her new friend from the Legal Aid Center had coached her about staying calm in such situations. A different receptionist, younger than the one before, welcomed her and directed her to take the elevator up to the 20th floor. There, she was met by a well-dressed young woman who introduced herself politely, though her eyes flicked over Alyssa with a careful scrutiny. They led her into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She'd never been so high up before. The view almost made her dizzy. The furniture gleamed under overhead lights that felt too bright. On one side of the long table sat Ethan, his posture tense, a guarded expression in his eyes. Beside him were two older men and a woman, each dressed in impeccably tailored suits, their faces lined with cool professionalism. Alyssa swallowed, fighting the urge to turn and flee. Ethan didn't greet her with any warmth. If anything, he seemed to be keeping his gaze carefully averted, as though looking at her too closely might shake his composure. One of the suited men cleared his throat and motioned for Alyssa to sit opposite them. She lowered herself slowly, feeling the firm leather beneath her, and set her worn bag on her lap. An older lawyer, silver-haired, wearing wire-rimmed glasses, spoke first. "Ms. Alyssa, we appreciate you coming in today." His tone was as courteous as it was detached, the voice of someone who conducted dozens of such meetings every month. "We understand you have claimed that Mr. Davis is the father of your unborn children. Is that correct?" Alyssa's throat felt dry. "Yes, I believe I made that clear already." He nodded. "Well, we need to hear the specifics. You claim to have met Mr. Davis under unusual circumstances. A cruise, correct?" Her eyes flicked toward Ethan, but his face remained expressionless. She exhaled, determined not to waver. "I won a ticket for that cruise. Mr. Davis and I met unexpectedly on one of the party nights. We danced. We spent time together. He left before the trip ended, and we never exchanged any contact information." Another lawyer, a woman with a sharp gaze, leaned forward. "How do you know it was Mr. Davis you met?" Alyssa reached into her bag for the wristband. She tried to keep her voice steady. "I found this after he left. It was forgotten in a bar area on the ship." She tilted it so the engraved initials ED caught the light. "I didn't know who he really was until I did some research later." A murmur rose among the lawyers. One carefully picked up the wristband for inspection. The man in wire-rimmed glasses turned to Ethan. "Mr. Davis, do you recognize this item?" Ethan briefly glanced at the gold band. His jaw twitched. "It looks familiar," he said quietly, refusing to elaborate. "And you had no knowledge of Ms. Alyssa's attempts to contact you?" asked the same man, flipping through some documents Alyssa recognized as copies of her emails. Ethan shook his head. "Not until recently. I have staff who screen these claims." His choice of words made Alyssa cringe. "But once I saw her in person, I remembered we shared an evening on the ship." Alyssa's cheeks warmed. She tried not to let her humiliation show. One evening, that was all he would admit to. And yet that single evening had turned her entire life upside down. The questioning continued, each lawyer taking a turn to grill Alyssa about her personal life, her job, her finances, any past relationships. They wanted to know if she'd ever made claims like this before, if she had any debts or outstanding legal troubles. The slow, methodical dissection of her private affairs left her feeling exposed. She cast quick glances at Ethan, hoping he might step in, but each time he remained impassive, occasionally nodding at his lawyers as if to encourage them. Finally, the woman lawyer placed a sleek folder on the table and slid it toward Alyssa. "If you're indeed certain that these unborn children are Mr. Davis's, we ask that you undergo a DNA test to confirm paternity. We've made arrangements with a reputable lab. You'll sign the forms included, and once the tests are complete, we'll discuss the next steps." The official, businesslike way she presented the idea felt cold, but Alyssa steeled herself. If that's what it takes for Ethan to accept responsibility, then yes, I have nothing to hide. She glanced at him, determined to show him that she wasn't there to scam anyone. "But I'm not some con artist. I've told you the truth from day one." His eyes flicked to hers at that final statement, a flash of something unsettled behind them. Before she could read it further, the silver-haired lawyer waved a hand. "Please take some time to review these documents, sign where indicated, and return them. Once we have conclusive proof, we'll arrange a more comprehensive discussion." He pushed a pen across the table, and Alyssa stared at it for a few seconds. Was this really happening? There she was, in a room full of suits, forced to prove her integrity before anyone would believe she wasn't lying. She inhaled deeply, refusing to crumble. Carefully, she picked up the pen and signed each line. If it would bring her closer to clarity, she had no choice. As soon as she was done, the woman stood, collecting the folder. "We'll be in touch. In the meantime, we ask you not to make any mention of these claims publicly for Mr. Davis's privacy and the reputation of his corporation." Alyssa's anger flared, but she held her tongue, aware that any outburst now might derail the tenuous steps forward she'd made. The meeting concluded abruptly, the lawyers gathering their briefcases and laptops with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Alyssa rose from her seat, her legs slightly shaky. Outside the conference room, she paused, looking back at Ethan. He lingered by the window, hands stuffed in his pockets, eyes still guarded. She drew a breath, summoning the courage to address him directly. "Ethan, I hope you realize this isn't just about the test. It's about doing the right thing." Her voice softened. "I never wanted to ambush you. But these babies—" He turned, and for an instant, she saw conflicting emotions flicker across his face. Then he nodded, offering a stilted reply. "We'll see what the tests say," he murmured. That was all she got before the lawyers ushered her out. She made her way down the hallway to the elevator, her thoughts churning in frustration and relief. At least something was happening now. No more dead ends, no more ignoring her emails. A step forward, even if it was a small one. In the days that followed, she followed the legal team's instructions, visiting the designated clinic and submitting blood samples for the preliminary tests. It was a surreal experience, medical forms bearing Ethan's name next to hers, the quiet hum of lab equipment while the technician explained how long everything might take. She reminded herself constantly that if science sided with her, Ethan would have no choice but to face the truth. That evening she sat alone in her living room staring at her ultrasound photos taped to the refrigerator door. The quiet hum of traffic seeped through the windows, and the warm glow of a single lamp illuminated her modest furniture. She felt a strange mixture of calm and trepidation. Soon she would have official, undeniable proof. One way or another, her life would never be the same again. Late that night, Alyssa gets a call from the medical lab. Ethan's team has rushed the tests, and results will be available sooner than she ever expected. Alyssa sat hunched on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. The lab technician's call earlier that afternoon had been curt and formal, confirming what she already felt in her bones. Ethan was indeed the father of her triplets. The preliminary test results stood at a near-certain match, more than enough to dispel any lingering doubt about her claim. Yet the confirmation left her rattled, as if the walls of her small apartment were closing in. She fidgeted with the strap of her bag, her heart twisting with a mix of victory and dread. She'd been telling the truth all along. Ethan couldn't deny it anymore. But she also knew this proof could trigger more conflict instead of resolution. It felt like a ticking clock in her hands. Even if the evidence was now irrefutable, she expected that Ethan's team would be anything but gracious. A gust of wind rattled the window pane, drawing her out of her thoughts. She glanced around her modest living room, reminding herself she needed to remain strong. She was fighting not just for herself, but for 3 little ones who deserved a father's acknowledgement. Taking a deep breath, she dialed the legal firm handling Ethan's affairs, her stomach flip-flopping with every ring. Finally, a brisk voice answered. "Good afternoon, Ms. Alyssa," said the woman on the other end, sounding more guarded than friendly. "We've received the initial DNA findings from the lab. Are you prepared to discuss them?" She cleared her throat, trying to steady her voice. "Yes, I am. I just want to know what steps come next." There was a slight pause. "We'll set up a formal meeting for you and Mr. Davis to review the final documentation. Our office will be in touch with a date." No warm congratulations, no polite sympathy for the swirl of emotions she must be feeling. The conversation ended with a curt goodbye. Alyssa stared at the silent phone. She knew nothing about what Ethan's reaction might be, whether he felt shock, relief, or anger. Her mind replayed the moment at the gala when she'd spotted real conflict in his eyes, as if he was torn between wanting to help and wanting to run. Now that the truth was out, would he open his heart or build higher walls? A few days later, she found herself in the same glass tower as before, only this time in a smaller, more somber conference room. The blinds were half drawn, letting in a bleak wash of city light. Across the table sat Ethan, flanked by the same two lawyers who had grilled her. He seemed even more distant than before, the usual confidence in his posture seeming forced. She wondered if he'd slept much lately, or if he was wrestling with the knowledge he couldn't escape this situation unscathed. The older lawyer with silver hair opened a folder on the table. "Ms. Alyssa, the final test results confirm a 99% probability that Mr. Davis is indeed the father." He glanced at Ethan, who kept his gaze cast downward. "We will move to the next phase of discussion. Now, considering the potential ramifications of this, we must stress that any public disclosure—" "Wait a second," Alyssa cut in. She looked at Ethan, summoning her courage. "You have the proof. I'm not lying. Are you going to step up, or do I have to keep fighting for your attention?" His head lifted, and she caught a brief flicker of vulnerability before he composed himself. "I never said you were lying," he said quietly. "It's just a lot to process." She felt her anger and relief colliding. "You vanished after the cruise," she said, a slight tremor in her voice. "You left me with no way to reach you, and I found out I was pregnant with triplets alone." Ethan shifted in his seat, letting out a low breath. "I was called away on business," he replied, though the excuse rang hollow. "I genuinely didn't know I'd met someone who'd change my life like this." His lawyers interjected with calm authority, redirecting the conversation toward the practical terms of support and confidentiality. It was painful for Alyssa to sit through. Phrases like monthly installments, non-disclosure agreements, and protecting brand image made her feel like a liability rather than a soon-to-be mother of 3 precious lives. She tried not to let frustration boil over, but every stiff word they spoke felt like a blow against her dignity. Midway through the meeting, something snapped in Ethan's expression. He gestured for his lawyers to pause, then turned to Alyssa directly. "I want further proof," he said, voice strained. "I know the science is conclusive, but I need time to think about how we handle this." "Handle this?" she echoed, her chest growing tight. "We're talking about children, Ethan, not some corporate merger you can just pivot out of." He swallowed, looking at her like he wanted to protest. But instead he nodded, a veil of frustration and uncertainty clouding his eyes. The lawyers exchanged glances, quietly continuing their conversation about next steps as though reading from a script. Alyssa felt sick at how clinical it all was. Still, she kept telling herself that confirmation was progress. As long as she had the tests in hand, Ethan couldn't ignore or deny her again. When they finally adjourned, one of the lawyers slid a stack of documents across the table. "Please read these thoroughly," he said. "They outline certain conditions regarding public disclosure, potential financial arrangements, and further medical monitoring. Once you sign, we can finalize an initial agreement." Her stomach churned at the thought of signing, but she also dreaded another avalanche of legal fees or court battles if she refused. She needed security for the babies, even if it meant stepping into a cage of legal constraints. She gathered the documents, nodding wordlessly. Ethan lingered behind as his lawyers left the room, his posture rigid. "Alyssa," he said, voice quieter now, "I never wanted to cause you this stress. My life, It's complicated, but I need you to know." He hesitated, pressing his lips together. "I don't think you're lying about anything. I just want clarity, and I want to protect what I've built." She looked at him, fighting tears. "Your empire doesn't mean much to me. I just want to know my children have a father who cares." He nodded, gaze dropping to the floor. "I'll do what's right," he said, though his tone suggested he was still figuring out what that meant. Moments later, he stepped into the hallway, and she was left alone in the conference room, the cityscape glinting through the windows like a silent audience. Outside the building, she discovered the tension was far from over. She had barely made it 10 steps from the lobby doors when a man in a dark suit approached her, face impassive. Before she could react, he spoke in a low voice. "I suggest you cooperate with whatever terms Mr. Davis's team proposes," he said, something glinting dangerously in his eyes. "It would be unfortunate if rumors circulated about you making false claims. We see that sort of thing ruin people." Alyssa's breath hitched. "I'm not making false claims," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The paternity test came back conclusive. He offered a wolfish smile. "Yes, well, not everyone needs to know every detail, do they? You'd be wise to stay silent. A quiet resolution is best, for everyone." As he turned and vanished into the flow of pedestrians, Alyssa's hands balled into fists. The threat was obvious enough. She felt a wave of anger on behalf of herself and her unborn children. What did they have to hide or fear if the truth was on her side? That night, she couldn't shake the creeping paranoia his words had inspired. She double-checked her apartment door, making sure the locks were secure. Despite her exhaustion, she found herself restless, every small noise in the hallway making her flinch. Around midnight, she finally managed to doze off on the couch. She jolted awake at a soft rustling sound, blinking in confusion. The corridor outside her apartment was quiet, but a sliver of light from under the door revealed a single envelope that hadn't been there before. Heart pounding, she slipped to the floor and pulled the envelope inside. It was plain, unmarked, no name, no postage, just a threatening aura. With trembling fingers, she tore it open. A sheet of paper, typed in a cold and impersonal font, spelled out a blunt ultimatum. Drop any demands or face severe legal and personal repercussions. Her throat tightened, her stomach turning. She didn't know who exactly had sent it. Maybe someone in Ethan's circle who feared scandal, or maybe a rogue associate out to protect his image at any cost. That evening, a nondescript envelope is slipped under Alyssa's door containing a harsh ultimatum. She unfolds it, heart racing, and realizes she's been warned to stay silent, or else. Alyssa stared at the threatening letter pinned to her kitchen counter, its stark, cold words warning her to keep quiet or suffer the consequences. She hadn't slept much since finding it slid under her door, and her nerves were stretched thin. Every time she heard an unfamiliar creak in the hallway, she jumped, half convinced she was being watched. The letter had no return address, no identifying name. It carried only the blunt threat to back off from her pursuit of Ethan Davis's acknowledgement, or else. When her phone rang mid-morning, her first instinct was dread, fearing more bad news. She let it buzz for several seconds before picking up with a shaky breath. A brisk, calm voice on the other end said, "Good morning, Ms. Alyssa. I'm calling on behalf of Ethan Davis. He wishes to speak with you in person. Today, if possible." The speaker sounded like a personal assistant, carefully neutral in tone. Alyssa's heart leaped, though she kept her voice steady. "Yes, I can make myself available. Where should I go?" "He'd prefer to meet at your residence," came the reply. "He feels it would be more comfortable for you." She paused. The idea of Ethan coming here, to her modest apartment, felt both terrifying and oddly comforting. But given the intimidation she'd been facing, it was better than stepping onto his territory again. "All right," she agreed softly. "When?" "Late afternoon. I'll text you details." The assistant answered before hanging up. Alyssa set her phone aside, exhaling shakily. At least Ethan was making an effort, but she doubted it would be a simple, gentle reunion. A swirl of relief and apprehension overtook her, and she glanced down at her small belly, where 3 growing lives reminded her of the stakes. No matter what, she had to stay strong. For them. The hours crept by. She paced her living room, making small attempts to tidy up, folding a blanket, straightening a stack of mail, adjusting the cushions. A sense of vulnerability knotted her stomach at the thought of him stepping into her world. Would he sneer at her worn-out sofa or the chipped paint on her walls? She reminded herself that it didn't matter what he thought of her modest life. The babies were real, and that was all the reason she needed to stand tall. When a knock finally came on her door, she opened it to find Ethan standing in the dimly lit hallway, alone. He wore a tailored coat, but beneath it, he looked a bit worn, as though sleep had eluded him. His gaze flicked around the corridor before settling on her with a cautious expression. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Gone was the confident veneer he'd worn at corporate meetings and the gala. She nodded, stepping back to let him pass. The door closed behind them with a slight click. He surveyed her living space, his posture tense but not dismissive. She tried to gauge if he found the apartment cramped or suffocating compared to his lavish lifestyle, but he said nothing, moving in awkward silence until he reached the center of the living room. Then he turned to face her. "I'm sorry for just showing up," he began, rubbing the back of his neck, "but I needed to speak to you without lawyers hovering around." He glanced at the small table where the ominous letter still lay partially folded, his brow furrowed. "Something happened, didn't it?" Alyssa pressed her lips together, fighting a surge of frustration. "What do you mean?" He shook his head, taking a step closer. "I've been doing some digging," he said, his voice low. "I had a private investigator look into you, your background, your history, your finances, everything. I needed to be sure you weren't setting me up." A flash of regret crossed his face. "And what I learned is that you've been honest. The stories, the timeline, your struggles, you never lied." Alyssa's eyes stung with anger, even if a small part of her felt validated. "So you believed your advisor's lies that I was some con artist," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "I guess that's easier than trusting the person who's carrying your children." He looked away for a moment, jaw tight. "I know. I'm sorry." He exhaled, shoulders slumping. "I didn't want to believe that I walked away from something this important. My life, my business. People try to trick me for money all the time or for publicity. It's made me suspicious, maybe too suspicious." She studied him, noticing the genuine shame that flickered in his eyes. "And now?" she asked, refusing to yield ground too easily. "Now," he said softly, "I realize you're not that person. You never were." He caught sight of the letter on the table. "Is that what I think it is?" He reached out gently, scanning the harsh words. His lips tightened into a grim line. "Who sent this?" Alyssa shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. It's not the first threat. Your lawyers want me to stay quiet, sign non-disclosure deals. And if that wasn't enough, some men in suits have been hinting that I should back off. One of them practically cornered me outside your building." Ethan cursed under his breath. "My advisors have gone way too far. They think they're protecting me, my brand, my image." He set the letter down with care. "I'll handle them. No one should be threatening you." She bit back a retort that he could have prevented this if he'd acted sooner. Instead, she asked in a steely voice, "So, what are you going to do about it?" He looked up at her, understanding the weight of her question. "I'm going to clean house," he answered, a decisive edge creeping into his tone. "Whoever crossed that line has to be removed. I won't tolerate it." Alyssa ran a hand over her stomach, thinking of the swirling future that loomed. "I'm still pregnant with triplets, Ethan. I can't handle constant threats or a legal war. I need security, and I need to know you won't vanish again." He nodded, stepping closer, as if wanting to bridge the gulf between them. "I won't. I promise." His voice softened. "I know an apology doesn't undo what you've gone through, but I plan to set it right. I already had one of my investigators double-check the people around me, my close associates, my lawyers, and I discovered plenty of questionable motives." Alyssa's chest tightened at the thought of how layered and complicated his world must be. "I can't step into your world if I'm always under attack," she whispered, "and I can't raise these babies alone." His gaze fell to her abdomen where the faint curve was more noticeable now. "I understand." He took a breath, as though preparing himself for a confession. "Believe me, I wish it had never gone this way. I liked you." That night on the cruise, it was the first time I'd felt genuine in a long time. Then my father's health crisis forced me to leave abruptly, and after that, everything spiraled. I wanted to reach out, but I was afraid of being deceived, so I listened to the wrong people. A flicker of sadness rippled through her. Part of her believed him. She'd sensed his sincerity that night. "I'm not some puzzle you can solve with an investigator," she replied, voice wavering. "We need to talk about the babies, about how we're going to move forward." He opened his mouth to respond, but a sudden vibration filled the air. Alyssa realized it was his phone, buzzing insistently in the pocket of his coat. He glanced at the screen, eyebrows snapping together in alarm. "It's one of my associates," he muttered, stepping away. "I need to take this." She stood in tense silence, watching him pace near the window. From his stony expression and clipped tone, she could tell something serious had happened. He ended the call, exhaling harshly, his face pale. "What's wrong?" she asked, bracing herself. He shoved the phone into his pocket. "One of our key investors just pulled out, claiming they found evidence of fraud in my company. It's all over the news, apparently. Some scandal tied to shipping contracts." Fear flickered in his eyes. If it's true, it could destroy everything. My entire empire. Alyssa felt her pulse surge. "Is this connected to your advisors, or the ones who threatened me?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't know yet. But if the media gets hold of us fighting over paternity at the same time, they'll spin it, feed the scandal. He swallowed. "It's all unraveling." Alyssa pressed a hand to her temple, barely able to comprehend the whirlwind swirling around them. Part of her wanted to lash out, to remind him that none of this would be happening if he'd been honest from the start. But the raw panic in his eyes held her back. A phone call interrupts their heated discussion. It's one of Ethan's close associates, frantically announcing a major scandal that threatens not only Ethan's empire but also Alyssa's fragile chance at normalcy. Alyssa sat in the passenger seat of Ethan's car, nervously tapping her foot against the floor mat as they wove through the city's crowded avenues. She could still feel the tension radiating off him since the phone call that upended what fragile peace they'd managed to build. Someone within his empire had orchestrated a scandal, one big enough to scare off investors and fling suspicion on his entire company. And with the paternity drama so close to breaking in the news, it felt like they were on the edge of a cliff, teetering. Ethan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "The board is demanding an emergency meeting," he murmured. "They want to question me about the accusations of fraud and confirm whether the rumors about my personal life have any truth." Alyssa shot him a worried glance. "Will they throw you out of your own company?" He exhaled, gaze fixed on the road. "If there's enough dirt to make me look incompetent or dishonest, they might. My father built this business from the ground up. I can't believe it's come to this." A line appeared between his brows, an anger that was sharper than the tension she'd seen before. "But we'll figure it out. We have to. I won't let these kids be dragged into a mess I could have prevented." The corporate headquarters stood taller than any building around, its reflective glass glinting beneath a gray sky. Ethan pulled into the underground lot, finding his personal spot vacant except for a few black SUVs that made Alyssa's stomach knot with apprehension. Security guards recognized Ethan instantly, waving them through. Inside, they stepped onto a private elevator that rose with a mechanical hum straight to an exclusive floor. They emerged into an expanse of polished tile and neutral-toned walls. The hush here felt surreal. The usual corporate bustle had turned into tense, waiting silence. A small crowd had gathered outside the boardroom, each face filled with worry or suspicion. When they caught sight of Ethan, the group parted like a wave, as though anxious to see how he would address the crisis. The boardroom doors loomed ahead, frosted glass panels hiding the confrontation within. Alyssa hesitated, unsure if she was allowed to be part of whatever showdown was about to happen. Sensing her unease, Ethan reached back and gently brushed her arm. "Please come," he said quietly, "if you can handle it." She nodded, steeling her nerves. "I'm not leaving you alone in there." The thick doors swung open to reveal a long table surrounded by men and women dressed in suits so impeccable they seemed ironed onto their bodies. Murmured conversations died the instant Ethan strode in, Alyssa just behind him. At the far end of the table sat a stern-faced man she recognized from a previous encounter, one of the advisors who'd been all too eager to dismiss her claims about the babies. "Ethan," that man began, tone controlled, "we need answers." His eyes flicked to Alyssa disapprovingly, then back. "The accusations of fraudulent shipping contracts are pouring in. We've lost a major investor in the last 24 hours, and now we hear rumors of a personal scandal involving you and—" "Enough!" Ethan snapped, cutting him off. He tossed a stack of documents onto the table where they fanned out for everyone to see. "These are statements from our finance team showing legitimate transactions. Whatever fraudulent paperwork is circulating didn't come from me or from any authorized official in my office." His voice carried a simmering fury. "Someone on the inside is forging documents to sink our reputation, and I have reason to believe the same person spread rumors about my personal life, hoping it would blow up at the worst possible time." An uneasy murmur rippled around the table. Alyssa stood by Ethan's side, arms crossed defensively over the slight curve of her stomach. She could feel the skepticism aimed at her, from the older, gray-haired executives who seemed to resent her presence, to the younger ones who eyed her with guarded curiosity. A woman in a navy blazer leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. "Mr. Davis, can you provide any proof as to who might be behind this sabotage?" Ethan reached for a folder Alyssa hadn't noticed he was carrying. He opened it, revealing photocopied emails and signature pages with times and dates scrawled in the margins. "I had a private investigator compare these to official company records," he explained. "We found anomalies, particularly in the shipping contract area. Several were signed by an executive who was supposedly out of the country when they were dated." He paused, scanning the faces at the table. "I'm not going to name names yet," he said, tension thick in his tone, "but I have suspicions." Alyssa's eyes drifted to the stern-faced advisor. She caught the faintest twitch in his jaw. He shot her a glare as though to say, "Watch yourself." She shivered. The board erupted into murmurs again. Finally, one of the oldest members rapped his knuckles on the table for silence. "We'll form a special committee to investigate these documents immediately," he declared. "Until then, Ethan, you're still CEO, but you need to tread carefully. The press is circling like vultures, and any sign of weakness could destroy our stock value." Ethan nodded, face grim. "I understand." He closed his folder and took a measured breath. "One more thing," he added, giving Alyssa a quick sideways glance. "Regarding my personal life, I won't hide it. Ms. Alyssa is expecting my children. There's nothing scandalous about it, just two people figuring out their responsibilities." A flicker of surprise crossed a few faces. Others remained stone. But the admission felt like a small victory to Alyssa. At least he wasn't denying her now. Without further ceremony, the board ended the meeting, eager to huddle and plan damage control. Ethan guided Alyssa out of the room, his hand barely skimming her back. She sensed the tense stares behind them, but he seemed indifferent to the scrutiny. In the hallway, the echo of footsteps tapped around them, Suddenly, a man in a suit too expensive for his stiff demeanor rushed forward. "Mr. Davis," he said, forcing a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes, "we need to finalize some talking points before you release any public statement about this situation." He cast a thinly veiled glance at Alyssa. Ethan's tone was clipped. "I'll handle my own talking points." He slipped an arm protectively around Alyssa's shoulders, a gesture that sent the man stepping back in surprise. She stiffened at first, then let herself lean into him slightly. The tension of the day, and the weeks before, threatened to overwhelm her. She needed a moment of calm. He guided her to a smaller, private conference room and closed the door. They stood in silence, framed by the panoramic city skyline. She looked up at him, noticing the worry etched into his features. "Thank you," she murmured, "for admitting the truth about us and the babies in front of everyone." His expression softened, though the weight of stress remained in his eyes. "I should have done it long ago," he said. "But I was scared. Scared of being betrayed, of losing everything I'd built." He exhaled shakily. "Now I see that letting others manipulate me nearly cost me the chance to know my own children." She moved a hand over her belly. "They'll be lucky to know you if you can keep them safe from all this." She gestured at the glass walls, the office beyond, the layers of corporate intrigue swirling around them. His jaw tightened. "I'm going to find whoever leaked those false contracts, and I'll make sure no one dares threaten you again." He stepped closer, letting his hand rest over hers where it lay on her stomach. It was a tentative gesture, as though he was still learning how to be vulnerable. "Can we figure it out, Alyssa?" he asked quietly. "How to be a family, even with all this craziness?" She felt tears prick her eyes, a relief as much as anything else. "I want that," she whispered, the enormity of the confession making her tremble. "But trust doesn't happen overnight. You have to prove I'm not alone in this." He nodded, determination flaring in his gaze. "I will." Before either could say more, the door burst open. One of Ethan's assistants stumbled in, face pale. "Sir, I'm so sorry," the assistant gasped, words tumbling in a rush. "I've been trying to reach you. We just got a call from a hospital, Ms. Alyssa's obstetrician's office. They said there was an urgent issue with her routine checkup, something about the triplets." Alarm seized Alyssa's chest. She stepped forward, voice shaking. "What happened? Are they okay?" The assistant shook their head, uncertain. "They need you both there immediately." Ethan wastes no time. He nods, gripping Alyssa's hand. Together they bolt out of the room, the echoes of their hurried footsteps reverberating in the corridors. The scandal, the sabotage, the intrigue, none of it mattered in that instant compared to ensuring the safety of the lives they'd barely begun to protect. Ethan receives a call from the hospital. A routine prenatal checkup for Alyssa has become urgent. There might be complications with the triplets, and they need immediate medical attention. Alyssa's heart thumped wildly as she hurried alongside Ethan through the crowded hospital corridor. The fluorescent lights overhead did nothing to calm her nerves. Nurses and doctors rushed by, their voices muffled by the roar of her own pulse. She clutched Ethan's hand tightly, trying to control the whirlwind of panicked thoughts. What if the babies are in danger? What if something went wrong and she hadn't realized? He guided her toward the maternity wing, where a nurse stopped them in front of a set of double doors. The nurse offered a sympathetic smile before leading them to an ultrasound room. Inside, the soft beep of machinery filled the air. Alyssa recognized her obstetrician, Dr. Fletcher, who had been monitoring her pregnancy from the start. The doctor's expression was serious, but not unkind. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Dr. Fletcher said in a hushed tone. "There was a concern during the routine scan. We spotted a possible complication with one of the triplets, something that suggested restricted growth or reduced fluid. We need to take a closer look." Alyssa's breath hitched. She felt Ethan's reassuring grip on her shoulder, a warmth she desperately needed. Carefully, she settled onto the examination table, heart pounding as the doctor prepared the ultrasound machine. She glanced at Ethan, and despite the tension in his jaw, he offered a tiny nod that said, "I'm here." Moments later, the screen flickered to life, displaying the outlines of 3 tiny shapes. The doctor moved the probe skillfully, describing what they were seeing in calm, measured words: heartbeat patterns, fluid levels, placentas. Alyssa's chest tightened at every pause, terrified the doctor would say something catastrophic. Instead, Dr. Fletcher let out a soft sigh. "It seems the initial alert was a false alarm or a misreading," Dr. Fletcher explained, relief evident in her voice. "All 3 babies have stable heartbeats. The fluid levels look within acceptable ranges. We'll keep an eye on them, of course, but for now it appears there's no immediate danger." Alyssa's shoulders sagged with relief, tears threatening to spill. She turned to Ethan, who slowly exhaled, as if he'd been holding his breath the entire time. He placed a gentle hand on her cheek. "Thank you, Doctor," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "We're incredibly grateful." Dr. Fletcher offered a reassuring smile. "Keep up with your prenatal vitamins, reduce stress as best you can, and rest. Stress is the last thing you need right now." Alyssa let out a shaky laugh. "I'll do my best," she whispered, though she knew that in their current situation, stress was nearly impossible to avoid. Once the doctor finished, she and Ethan stepped back into the hallway, each wave of relief giving way to the next question: what now? They found a quiet corner near the hospital's main lobby. A floor-to-ceiling window overlooked a courtyard where trees rustled softly in a light breeze. The day's earlier frenzy felt muted beneath the fluorescent hum. Alyssa pressed a hand to her belly, still awash in gratitude that her babies were all right. Ethan leaned against the window, his eyes distant for a moment. "I thought I was going to lose everything," he admitted, voice subdued. "Not just my company, but this chance I have with you and the babies. That phone call," he shook his head. "It brought everything into perspective. None of the corporate drama means anything next to our children's health." She nodded, stepping closer so their shoulders touched. "We still have to handle that drama," she reminded him quietly. "There are forces out there trying to sabotage you, sabotage us, and we can't pretend it'll go away on its own." His gaze hardened with resolve. "No," he agreed. "I'm going to root out whoever's responsible. I have a pretty strong suspicion who it might be, and it's someone close enough to see my every move. They manipulated the shipping contracts, leaked false data to scare our investors, and used my personal life as ammunition. But now that I know the truth, I can confront them head-on." She slipped her hand into his. "I'm with you," she said, meaning every word. "I don't want to live in fear of the next threat or letter shoved under my door. We deal with it together." Moved by her solidarity, Ethan turned his hand to entwine their fingers. His expression softened. "Thank you," he whispered. "You have no idea how much that means." Before they could say more, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced down, reading a terse text that made his lips press into a thin line. "They've called an urgent board meeting," he explained grimly. "I suspect my prime advisor and likely the sabotage mastermind will be there." She could sense the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "Then let's go." The drive back to headquarters felt surreal, but this time Ethan seemed oddly calm, like a man who finally had clarity. Alyssa drew courage from his steadiness. Once inside the boardroom, they found the atmosphere charged. In a corner, a man Alyssa recognized as one of Ethan's top advisors paced nervously. The same man who had cast doubt on her, spread rumors, and more than once glared at her with open hostility. Ethan cleared his throat, drawing all eyes to him. "I trust everyone's seen the latest numbers?" he asked, dropping a folder on the table. "They show the shipping fraud was funneled through a shell company, and I have reason to believe a certain member of my team established that shell company for personal gain." The tension in the room mounted. The advisor stopped pacing, face pale. "Ethan," "This is a misunderstanding," he bluffed, looking around for support. "You can't believe these allegations." But Ethan remained unwavering. "You forced me to question a woman carrying my children, forced me to consider shutting her out of my life because of your manipulations. You wanted me to see her as a scammer when you were the one orchestrating a scam under my nose." The advisor's jaw clenched. Others in the room stared at him, realization dawning. A few board members exchanged whispers, clearly recognizing that the evidence stacked too high to be coincidence. Ethan let the silence stretch before nodding to security guards who stood by the door. "Escort him out," he ordered, voice even. "We'll be pressing charges, and I'm sure the authorities will find these documents compelling." Alyssa watched as the advisor tried to bluster, but the guards had already moved in. In a matter of seconds, he was taken from the room, his protests echoing down the hallway. A quiet hush followed, and then a murmur of relief rippled through the group. An older board member stood, clearing his throat. "Mr. Davis, we should issue a press release immediately, clarifying the nature of the fraud and exonerating you from blame." "I agree," Ethan replied, exhaling as though a great weight had lifted. "Thank you for your cooperation. I'll handle any media inquiries personally regarding my private life. My children aren't going to be another headline." Alyssa felt a surge of admiration for him. After all the mistrust, he was finally standing firm for what mattered most: the truth and his family. That evening, exhaustion settled into Alyssa's bones. She lay on Ethan's couch in his penthouse, the city lights twinkling through the tall windows. Everything felt almost too quiet after the day's chaos. Ethan sat beside her, sifting through a stack of papers detailing the next steps: press statements, legal actions against the disgraced advisor, financial reorganizations. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling a soft flutter. The babies seemed calmer, as though they understood that the worst of the storm might be over. "I can't believe how quickly all this changed," she murmured, "from threatened lawsuits to criminal charges." Ethan set the papers aside and looked at her, weariness mingling with a gentle warmth. "Things had to change," he said. "Otherwise I'd have lost everything. You showed me that." She shifted, meeting his eyes. "I never wanted to tear your life apart." "Sometimes you have to tear things down to rebuild them, right?" he admitted, leaning in closer. "And if we're rebuilding, I want us to do it together." Her throat felt tight, the beginnings of tears burning there. "I still can't believe we ended up here," she confessed softly. "All those weeks of searching for you, the heartbreak of thinking you'd run off forever. And now we're talking about raising 3 children. He brushed a hand gently along her cheek. "That night on the cruise, I felt something I couldn't explain, like I could be myself for once. Then life and fear got in the way, but I never forgot." She let him take her hand, her heart brimming with vulnerability and hope. "Neither did I," she whispered. And in that moment, she realized she could see a future where trust replaced all the suspicion, where their children would grow up with both parents present and united. In the days that followed, the press latched onto the news of the shipping fraud, swirling rumors about who had orchestrated it and what would become of Ethan Davis's empire. But thanks to a swift investigation and Ethan's transparency, public attention veered away from the paternity angle. True to his word, Ethan used every resource at his disposal to shield Alyssa from the hungry eyes of reporters, and whenever they did appear, he stood by her side, calm, committed, showing the world that she was neither a gold digger nor a passing fling. Soon enough, the media found a new headline to chase, and the scandal that once threatened to break them receded into background noise. Alyssa focused on her pregnancy, attending appointments without the ominous dread that once followed her. Ethan often accompanied her, insisting on hearing every heartbeat, every new detail the doctors shared. He convinced her to leave her small apartment and stay in a secure residence with him, at least until the triplets arrived. Despite her initial hesitance, she recognized the practicality. His place offered more space and safety than her cramped building, and her heart warmed at his eagerness to share a home. They formed new routines. Mornings began with herbal tea. Alyssa's doctor recommended avoiding caffeine, and ended with quiet evenings where they mulled over potential baby names. Their dynamic wasn't without hurdles, compromise over how to merge their vastly different lifestyles, or arguments sparked by lingering trust issues. But every moment spent working through those challenges felt like a step toward the family neither had imagined, but both had come to cherish. One bright afternoon, as her belly had grown undeniably large, Ethan surprised Alyssa by suggesting a short getaway for a break. "Not too far," he said. "Just a day trip on one of my company's smaller yachts. Fresh air, calm seas." She hesitated. Memories of that first cruise danced in her mind, a swirl of enchantment and heartbreak, but eventually she nodded with a soft smile. Maybe this time, a boat trip would mark a brand new start instead of an ending. Early the next morning, they stood hand in hand on the deck of a sleek, sunlit vessel, feeling the sea breeze brush over them. Waves sparkled beneath the bright sky, and a quiet peace settled around them. She leaned into him, listening to the rhythmic thrum of the engine, the echo of seagulls overhead. He placed a gentle palm over the curve of her stomach, smiling at the life stirring within. "I think about how different everything is from when we met," he said softly. "It took a lot of pain to get here, but I don't regret it." She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "Neither do I. We're standing here because of that crazy, magical night." He tilted his head, gazing at her with renewed warmth. "I love you," he said simply, as if he'd finally allowed himself to say it out loud. His voice cracked slightly, giving his confession a raw sincerity that filled her chest with warmth. She smiled through the tears building in her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. The words tasted like hope and promise, the perfect anchor to the tumultuous sea of their past, a gentle sense of closure and optimism. We glimpsed them months later, standing on the deck of one of Ethan's luxury ships, arms around each other, the babies in a stroller, sailing off into a bright future, proof that even the strangest twists of fate can lead to a lasting, cherished bond. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.